Thank you for auditing the always positive new music review show hosted by a French professor who is excited to review Backxwash's new album, I Lie Buried with My Rings and My Dresses. I'm going to be framing the entire review under this concept, that this is under the genre that is called horrorcore, but I want to be more specific and break this album down into the 6 horrors of Backxwash. Don't worry, there will be one light moment in the middle of the video, a kind of a bright moment where we get out of the horror. But this is an album that really plunges you into the mode of sort of terror and fear and anguish, and I think it's okay for us to be there. Before I go further, I want to talk a little bit about the nature of horror itself. I don't know if I'd say a fanatic, but probably close to a fanatic of horror movies. I love horror movies. I watch them whenever they come out in theaters. It's one of my favorite things to do. But it is an inescapable fact that modern horror was created by and for people like me, white, straight, cis males. The reason that this is important is that that shapes what horror does. If horror is capable of playing on our inner fears, and if it's capable of revealing things within ourselves that we don't know are there, what is it that people like me fear? Well, we fear losing something. We have been given everything, so it makes sense that what we would present to the world are figures which could take things away. We are threatened. It is not that our existence is dark or is dangerous. The nature of horror movies is that maybe suburbia could get a little worse. That's our primary fear. This is why in horror movies, and I'm definitely not the first or 100th person to say this, but horror movies are normalizing. They take what is good and normal in middle-class white society, and then they present some kind of aberration, something that could threaten that stability, that status quo, and then they symbolically and physically defeat and kill that threat. That is the history of horror. The history of horror is actually, sadly to say, primarily the perpetuation of a system of power which keeps white, cis, straight males in power, in dominance, and sitting in their basements thinking they're being transgressive because of all the blood, but really they're just being fed the same bullshit about how we rule the world, and we will always rule the world unless some cool guy with a mask or some knives comes in and ends it for us. Which is why an album like I Lie Here Buried with My Rings and Dresses as a horrorcore album is so important. White, cis, straight males created modern horror. But we are not the future of horror. The future of horror is with marginalized people. Their horror, their terror is actual. Their fear is not imagined, is not hypothesized, is not, boy, what would it be like to be under threat? It is a daily lived experiment, not a goddamn thought experiment made to help us feel something when we are so overstuffed with pizza rolls and money. Okay? This is why, even if Jordan Peele's movies cinematically are sometimes a little bit uneven, they are so important. This isn't, American Werewolf in London is a near-perfect movie, okay? But what a orgy of just privilege gone wrong. What if I travel to Europe and it doesn't go well? I need to feel some sort of danger. So what we see with Backxwash is somebody who is expressing through these 6 separate horrors real threat, real danger. And it is our job as a society, it is my job as a cis, white, straight male to confront these and to take them seriously and not to just say, oh, this is other people's music, this is other people's fear. Now to understand how Backxwash is threatened, just so you know, you spell that with an X in the middle, Backxwash. I don't know why. Some biography is needed. And for that matter, some geography is needed. In general, I try not to get into biography whenever I study artists. But in order to understand her, in order to understand her music, in order to understand her perspective, you need to understand where she comes from. The first horror, to that point, is the horror of racism. She was born and raised in Zambia. Hey, here's a fun thought. Where do you think Zambia is? Thanks to my son, who's very interested in geography, I knew the general area. I knew it was a little, maybe right next to South Africa. It's not, but in that general southist, centralist area. So you know, imagine Madagascar and then just kind of go into the middle of Africa from Madagascar. That's a good idea of where Zambia is. Bordered by Angola, Democratic Republic of Congo, Malawi, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Botswana, and it's landlocked and it's an interesting country. And here's the thing, what if I met someone from Zambia? Do you know what I would say? Oh, what happens when I meet people from France? Oh, I know this music and that culture. What happens if I meet somebody from Ghana? Well, I've studied all this music from Ghana. If I meet someone from Serbia, I know this music from Serbia. Representation really matters. And the fact that we are now capable of talking, that if I ever meet someone from Zambia, I'll say, have you ever heard the music of Backxwash? Her music is quite interesting. She represents a lot of interesting things about the Zambian experience and of the experience of immigration, because she moved to Canada. She now lives in Quebec, in Montreal. So, we have this whole story. We have this great representation through hip-hop of whoever she is, and she's able to represent the feeling of alienation and racism, which she certainly feels, as she calls it, in the North. I don't think this means in the North as like the North, true, great North and free. Whatever the Canadian national anthem is, it's something in that realm. I think what she means is just the global North, right? Which encompasses America and Canada. So this racism is all the way throughout the album. You feel the pain, you feel the fear all the way throughout. Related to that is the second horror of this album, which is the horror of slavery. Slavery is mentioned several times throughout here. Have you ever actually read what the Middle Passage was like? When I teach my class on Haiti, I have to teach, well, I get to teach, I don't know. When I say I have to, I mean it is your moral obligation to understand the Middle Passage, and it is my moral obligation as a teacher to teach about the Middle Passage. It is such a horror show. It is such an incomprehensible parade of death and claustrophobia and disease that, of course, why has there not been not one great horror movie about the Middle Passage? Why is there not an entire genre about the Middle Passage? Is there anything scarier than being abducted from your home, stacked like cordwood in the middle of a ship next to dying people, hoping that you live long enough to be whipped to death? Okay? This is not, oh wow, like, what if you sleep, but when you have a nightmare, you die? By the way, Nightmare on Elm Street is one of my probably top 5 favorite movies. So we have these kinds of fears. The slavery one is a little bit interesting because she isn't actually North American. It's an interesting idea because probably she is not descendant from slaves from the Middle Passage. So in some ways, her slave narratives are somewhat abstracted, right? But I'm not going to get too much into that because this is also the question of, and this is something that is always tricky for me to address as a very white person, but there is a global black movement that is happening, in which case there's an understanding that the suffering of one group in one country is felt by the other. So I think it's in that category. The third horror, and this may be the most prevalent horror on here, is the horror of transphobia. Her name is Ashanti Mutina, and apparently, according to what I read, she transitioned 4 or 5 years ago, pretty quickly after she moved. She's only been in Canada, I think, maybe 5 or 6 years for that matter. And on the album, we feel the pain of transphobia. And I would say that the pain is external, but I also feel that the pain is internal, because often the pain is represented by family rejection. And to have family rejection implies internal rejection, because the values of your family are your first values. So that's the third horror. I'd say the fourth horror is just the horror of being trans, of having this biological mental division. And the body horror of transitioning, the difficulty of hormones and changing your body physically and all these things, which I don't know. I have not done much research on this in terms of where she is in her transition, but you feel it. There's a lot of blood on this album. There's a lot of scream and torture and pain, and you feel it, right? Interesting thing is she never, as far as I can tell, tries to change her voice. So it's interesting because the voice, it's in the horrorcore rap genre. It has that feeling, yet she never tries to pass with her voice, which is an interesting dichotomy. I'd say the fifth horror is the fifth horror of religion, which is maybe more of an ambiguity. If you don't know, Zambia is a majority Christian country because, of course, it was colonized by England. I just left that blank in case you knew. That'd be exciting. I kind of cheat because as a French professor, I'm like, well, if it's not one of the Francophone countries, it's probably England. But when she takes on religion, it's not like she's just dunking on hypocrites. It feels as though there's a big conflict within her, and it's actually that conflict that's the horror, where she feels some amount of relief, some kind of connection to her religion, which obviously rejects her. And the sixth horror is the horror of drug abuse. Now, I'm not one to excuse bad behavior, on trauma. But it does feel pretty linked here that she just abuses a lot of drugs. This lady does a lot of drugs. I'm not going to say this lady likes drugs. There's only one song that really is seems even remotely positive. But we get this feeling. And all just in this one woman, we have this feeling of just all this pain and horror of racism and transphobia and slavery and drug abuse and religion. All this in this one character who's capable of putting forth as a rapper and a producer all of this music. This is a very important, crazy, crazy document. And a reminder of why do I teach hip-hop? Why do I care so much about hip-hop, right? This is not the lived experience. I have not lived a hip-hop life. But it's because it is so important. And because it is inevitable that basically all culture will be consumed by hip-hop. And that's a good thing. It is for everybody. It is so accessible as an art form. It has such a permission to just to say what you need to say. It's one of the weird ironies of hip-hop that, like, it's often associated with and guilty of toxic masculinity and a sort of rejection of emotion, but it's all there. It's one of the few places in music where you can actually write a poem and get it out to millions of people, right? And it's for everybody. It is for all races, all people, all genders, to the point where we have a trans woman immigrant from South Central Africa in French Canada, and we're able to say, hey, what's her life like? I'll also say, when I get back to this question of representation, as I've said in other videos, I've considered myself an ally of all sorts for a long time, but trans rights was something that didn't come naturally to me. And it was thanks to two forces, thanks to YouTube and music, that I was able to actually understand and empathize better and I consider myself to be a trans rights activist, right? I do. But it started off where I was ashamed to say, years ago, I would say I was something of a transphobe. Not externally, but internally, okay? And, obviously there are people in my life who I care a lot about who are trans, and that's one thing, right? But that's different than that's different than actually trying to understand sort of artistically and spiritually from people who are strangers, for people who I just can't have that kind of ease of like, oh, well, I know them, so I know it, right? So it's another part of why this is so important, that music is able to create it and able to create empathy. And I've reviewed a lot of trans artists on this channel, and it's intentional. I mean, not just because happens to be a lot of great music that's being made right now by people who happen to be trans, but because it really is helping me on my journey to fighting my internal transphobia that exists and is getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller to the point where maybe it doesn't even exist anymore. I will say, this is a side note. Speaking of YouTube, you know, part of the way that I became less of a transphobe was my exposure to leftist YouTubers, you know, in particular ContraPoints. Her work was like, oh, I understand. I understand. Is that what I do? Okay. But there's another YouTuber that I think, I don't know why I'm saying this, I imagine that a lot of you watch as much YouTube as I do, named Thought Slime. And another guy kind of like me, sort of cis white male, you know, kind of nice, kind of goofy. And I realized, like, this album, it's just my hope that Thought Slime will do a video about this musician. So if you want to, like, have some kind of, like, I don't know, petitioning campaign or something, because much like me, he's an ally of all sorts who focuses on marginalized people, on racism, on transphobia, but also he has an entire channel about horror movies, and he often tries to deal with the complicated nature, the troubling nature of a lot of the messages behind horror movies. So I don't know. And also, he's Canadian. So I don't know. It's for Scaredy Matt's eyeballs. I don't know what. I think this would work pretty well. I was even thinking about submitting it to him, this video. But my channel is not explicitly leftist. It is radically humanist. And therefore, implicitly leftist. But okay. So let's get on to the album. 60 minutes in, I've almost talked about some music. But I wanted to kind of set the stage to understand, before we even get to the music, which I enjoy quite a bit, the sort of importance that is in this music. So what I do is I give homework, okay? And for that, I just pick a sample song, and I have you listen to it. And when you listen to it, I want you to get an idea of what the album sounds like. I pick a song. So I picked the song Terror Packets. I'm going to put a message up there, you know, a link up there. And it's with someone named Censored Dialogue. And how is this a typical song of Backxwash? Well, first of all, it has a lot of nice dynamics to it. It starts with a gentle piano that goes all the way throughout. Eventually, this whining, irritating, descending, droning synthesizer comes in. There's all sorts of like yells and screams on this album from synthesizers. Eventually, this like heavy, hard-ass John Bonham drum beat just comes in, just and these synthesizers come in, and they just and as it goes, you just feel her raps with just this controlled anger, and her best lyrics on the album, which I'll get into soon. And then as the song even develops even further, eventually the piano drops out, and after she's like yelling and screaming and then restrained, and then the whole thing ends with Angela Davis talking about the inevitability of violence due to racism. The whole thing is this great journey where we go from this little piano into this great sense, and it's a plunge into darkness. It really is. It's a plunge into like this very dark investigation into the pain of transitioning. I have sought out and enjoyed a lot of narratives of transition, but this is one which challenged me. I'd never thought of. The opening lyrics, "Where was you at when I had to trap just to pay for my hormones?" The implication here, had to trap, had to sell crack. I imagine this is metaphorical. I think she moved to Canada, according to what I read, to be like a computer engineer or something in British Columbia. So I'm imagining this is metaphorical, okay? But still this idea, right? Like the great rap narrative is having to trap in order to make it, you know, just be able to eat or to be able to be the king of your neighborhood or whatever it is. And here she is saying that she's having to trap to pay for hormones because transitioning is extremely expensive, right? Probably less, I think it's less expensive in Canada than it is in America. And then later she says, "Dad, can you help me afford transition?" Like, oh my God. Here she is, and now she's talking to her dad, and then this is the line, "Disowned through a cell phone." God damn. Disowned through a cell phone. So the dad, obviously, it's not in Canada. She moved here when she was 17. So she's calling her dad in Zambia and is getting disowned by cell phone. This is the horror, this is the daily horror of many people in the world who go through this process of transitioning, and here it is. And this music, ding, right? This isn't like some kind of like, you know, slam poetry. "Dad, can you help me afford transition? Disowned through a cell phone." No, it's like, all the way through. The look in his face, soul displaced, he don't know me no more. Ouch. Later on in the song, she gets told by her mom that she's not becoming feminized properly, and she says, I beat my cheekbones, conceal a jawline. So talking about the physical reality of having biologically been born a male and the way that your body is not perceived of as feminine enough, and the different places where that's difficult. Again, if you've never watched any of ContraPoint's videos on transitioning, you're missing out. And then it gets even more crazy. It starts to get into a sort of like a psychosexual analysis of blackness and sexuality and how it's perceived of by white lovers. It's like, whoa, I'm telling you, there's a lot of different horrors on here. Now these shawties really want to fuck me. Shawties, I believe, referring to women. So saying that she is being desired by women. And then this is the line that's repeated over and over again. I am just dick to these hoes. So what sounds like a typical misogynistic line is actually a really deep concept. That even though she is transitioned, even though she is a woman, to these hoes, and I think these hoes means women, but also just everybody, I am just a dick. That is what she represents to them. Throw out my heart, tie my stomach in knots, I am just a dick to these hoes. Why you always assume I'm a top? The stereotypes of black sexuality are dangerous, have led to countless murders throughout society. And this is what this song's about. That's what that line's about. It's not some funny line using some gay terminology that makes you go, oh, that's clever. This is about like why were so many black men lynched in the 20s? Partly, 30s, 40s, 50s, partly because of this concept of black sexuality being dominant, being overpowering. Men and women suffer from the same stereotypes. Why do you always assume I'm a top? That's a very powerful line. I'm just a dick to these hoes until the government says that I'm not. So now it's a question of getting the respect of the government, of her reality and her real name and her real existence. I'm just a dick to these hoes, and it just gets louder and starts yelling, and you feel the anger. And then the piano starts to even match her voice. There's all these great little production details all the way throughout the album. She's a very good producer, very good songwriter. Kind of like tinkling in the back, like loud and scary and unsettling. And then she asks herself, I wonder if I'm in love with the shame. I wonder if I'm in love with the shame. Hey, that's a deep line. She's just gonna sneak that one in there. She raps very fast. She raps very aggressively. It's easy. It's easy. I wonder if I'm in love with the shame. You know, I don't have, I don't have much in common, but I have felt a lot of shame in my life. And I do wonder, do I like it? Am I in love with the shame? I numb it away, but I always got something to say. A beautiful song, hard drums, horror synthesizer. If this is what horrorcore can do, and I think this is what we see. What's funny is that we often associate horrorcore with Eminem and blood and guts and oh my God, did he say that? Oh man, I can't believe it with the chainsaw and the viscera. That's actually kind of boring. Hell, even Gravediggers, even that's kind of boring. But this, and I'd say to a lesser extent what Clipping was doing with their album, with tying in these themes of racism, I think horrorcore might be the way of not the best way, but a way for marginalized people to use the horror genre, to use the tropes of horror to really reach people and get their message out. Okay, I'm going to go through the rest of the album somewhat quickly. It opens up with a track called The Purpose of Pain, which talks about how pain protects us over and over again. It's like in a round where the voice just keeps repeating, and getting all echoey. And it just talks about how pain is good sometimes. A little bit of pain can be a good thing because it tells you something is wrong. This whole album is trying to be a little bit of pain. It's actually trying to be a lot bit of pain with these 6 different forms of horror. Wail of the Banshee is the second track. Very scary, aggressive, great drum work. Lots of kind of message of of the drug use in here. A little bit a little bit sad on that end, but just the wail of the Banshee just starts off with this hyper-aggressive tones. Then we get the title track. It starts off with some distorted computer sounds, really nice guitar, crazy drums, and then someone on here is just doing full-on death metal scream. Insane metal clanging sounds in the background. I'm sorry, I am an old man. This was too much. I liked it the third or fourth time, but wow, is this a lot? This is a lot of screaming, a lot of anger. Oh, can't you just talk? Can't you just do some slam poetry? An interesting thing here, there's actually a point where you can hear her African accent come through a little bit when she's talking about African countries. She actually names them, Rwanda, Botswana, and you can hear a slight African accent in there. Very personal, hard life and racism, and just... and these racist bitches up north, like, God don't love me, okay. Just I talked about the kind of body horror issue here. You know, like, she refers to herself and says, I'll bleed for glory in this purgatory, and my menopause will set before me. And this concept of menopause, obviously, if you were biologically born a male, you're unlikely to experience menopause. So, like... talking about it, like talking about the physical realities of having a female body that you don't experience because of some biological... I don't get it. I don't experience it. I don't know that pain. But I get the feeling that she's saying something that a lot of people can relate to, and that it's important that she's saying it. Terror Packets is the next song, I already mentioned it. Then In the Holy Name, kind of a more straightforward hip-hop song, but still very industrial. Seems like a sort of mad at religion, but also somewhat comforted by it. There's like a... Wait, my shirt's inside out. Oh my... I've been a fool this whole time! I hate it when I do that. I was going to take a shower before the video, and then I was like, oh, actually I'll do the video now. So anyways. There's a bit here where there's a preacher giving an anti-gay sermon, and that's very clear. There's that this is part of what it's about. This anger, the horror of religion for non-cis white straight males. And then she mentions Sophie, which is interesting. I've had a few requests to cover Sophie. I don't think I'm going to. I'm not going to yet. I think I will eventually. Her death is so fresh that I would feel exploitative by covering Sophie. Sophie is one of the few artists that, while I was in my musical hibernation, I didn't pay attention to music from 2002 until 2018, I somehow picked up Face Shop, whatever that was. I somehow found it on some music feed, and I really liked it. And it was like this little teaser of what my life would be later. And it's very useful because of artists to study. Sophie was, if I had to pick like one artist to just randomly stumble on before I started really paying attention to music, she was a very good one. She also name checks Biden and Obama on this song. Okay, hey, I said there'd be a funny part to this video. Do you want to hear it now? This is for the song Blood in the Water. It's my daughter's final day of school, okay? And so I'm driving her to school, and as a joke, I said, I'm going to put on some relaxing music. Is that okay? And she's like, yeah, that's fine. And so I put on Blood on the Water, which is actually not one of the more difficult songs to hear. It's got a nice energetic beat, but just a scream chorus, just... Blood in the water! And while I was driving, my daughter just kept laughing. It was like, listening to this music, I expect to get to school and see like the hallways on fire and people throwing trash cans. I expect it to be like The Purge. That's the way she described it. And then she just gets deeper and deeper. And she's like, I expect to look up into the rafters and seeing kids hanging. I'm just like, whoa. But what was funny is, I remember driving to school with my mom when I was a little bit older than my daughter and playing Ministry for her, and just she was just totally shocked and just, why would anyone listen to this terrible industrial nightmare? And it's just a reminder that music is always capable of shocking. It always is. There will always be music that can shock you for one way or another, lyrical content or musical style. And that's just what this song was capable of doing. So if you can just imagine a nice kind of overcast day in suburban Rochester, New York, driving, having a little father-daughter moment, and just, blood in the water! And as she was walking off into school, she's like, I'm going to be singing that all day. Blood in the water! Okay, Song of Sinners is the next song, fairly catchy, actually. I really like the rhythm in her vocals, the way she's able to to keep these things going, and she's talking about the love of God and love itself, and this ambiguous relationship with the church becomes clear. There's a nice another vocalist on here, another female vocalist who has kind of a sweet texture to her sound. This is maybe the best texture on the album in general, because you have the metal kind of scrapings and gentle and rapping and scream rapping, but then also the sort of emotional but softer side from this other vocalist. If I could, I would like to hear a little bit more of this, a little bit more of the dynamics, a little bit of a respite from the purge. But still, it's a great song. And then we get to a song which could have been the centerpiece of this whole video. 666 in Lusaka, Luxaxa. I believe this is a reference to Lusaka, which of course is the capital of Zambia. You didn't know that? Lusaka is the capital of Zambia. Can everybody type that into the comments so that you remember? Because why do we not know this? Why do we know that the capital of Nevada is Carson City, and we don't know that the capital of Zambia is Lusaka? Lusaka. Everybody put it in the comments. I would rather you do that than smash the like bucket or subscribe, okay? I want to see the comments just filled. The capital of Zambia is Lusaka. Matter of fact, I want you to put that in other people's comments. I want to go through YouTube and I want to see everybody just type the capital of Zambia is Lusaka. We should know these things. It is meaningful for us to interact with other cultures and know that they exist, okay? All right. So there's a slave narrative. Is that a call to action? Is that what I'm supposed to do? This is basically a slave narrative. Like I said, there should be an entire genre for the middle passage, and this is moving in there, right? But what makes this song so fascinating is there's an integration of a more traditional African song in the back. I don't know the identity of the song, but there's African singing, and the rhythms of that singing gets tied into the industrial hardcore rap that's in there as well, and it's amazing. And it's a reminder of, I actually did this interview yesterday. I'll tell more about the channel. And I was talking a lot about the importance of immigration and rap. And part of what makes rap and immigration so interesting is that immigrants have a more authentic relationship to non-American, non-British music, right? Like, right? I mean, if an American rapper samples African music, the distance from Africa is wide, is extreme. But if someone moves from Zambia to Canada, when they're 17, like she did, that's a real connection, and that helps to make hip hop grander, expand its scope, expand its soundscape in a way that's authentic, that is not affect of Big Pimpin' with Jay-Z, and Timbaland, like making it sound kind of Arabic. But why? There's no connection between them and that, right? So that's in here. It's a great integration. Another reminder of why hip-hop is one of the great tools for showing the value of immigration to all societies. It's just part of what hip-hop can do. I don't think other musics do this as well. We get to the next song, Nine Hells, which is mostly just about addiction. Her rapping here is kind of like a mix between like Onyx and Eminem. Just all this drug abuse and just screaming. It's terrible. It's horrible. Burned Ashes is the final track. A nice kind of epic ending about like these demons and angry metal sounds. And she actually lets it breathe a little bit here with like distorted wailing guitars. And I kind of really like it. It's cool kind of like hi-hat work. Reminds me a little bit of the PSK drum beat. Right, has that kind of like sound to it, and it's a really nice kind of big ending to what is a big album. So there you go. There's the 6 horrors of Backxwash. Thankfully, I did not have to do this entire video about Backxwash itself. I remember being a kid and Backxwash, like, you'd share soda with your friends, and like we'd always get into a fight as to who would get the last sip because you didn't want it. You just go, it's all Backxwash. No, it's not. Yeah, you backwashed. I saw you. You backwashed. You take it and like you spit it into the bowl. I don't. Like backwash is such an unsettling thing, right? It really is. It's such an ugh. And it's perfect. Makes you uncomfortable. Makes you think. Gets you thinking. All right. Well then, until next time. There's the camera. Oh, one more thing. The capital of Zambia is Lusaka.